There are moments in our lives when words are not enough to communicate and capture the deep emotions inside us. The joy we feel at a wedding or the birth of a child, when tears of joy fall. The sorrow we feel at the loss of a loved one or receiving bad news, when tears of despair fall. In these profoundly powerful moments in our lives, when words seem to fail, perhaps it is okay to let the silence fill the space. Our Torah portion is defined by two such powerful moments: the immense joy of the Israelites as they complete and dedicate the tabernacle, when words alone are not enough and their joy for their connection with God is celebrated through sacrifices and intricate rituals. Perhaps Aaron's two sons, Nadav and Avihu, feel this same joy beyond words, and it moves them to bring an unauthorized sacrifice to God. Instead of their offering adding to the celebration, though, they are consumed in a divine fire and die in the sanctuary. Following their death, Moses said to Aaron, "This is what God meant by saying, through those near to me I show myself holy and gain glory before all the people." And Aaron was silent. Every major Torah commentary, classical and contemporary, has something to say about Aaron's silence. The word in Hebrew, vayidom, could mean either moaning or wailing, or, more commonly as it is translated here, silence. And if we take the alternate translation of crying and wailing, we can picture Aaron's grief manifesting in tears of anguish as he hears of the death of his sons. What could he possibly say in this moment? What could any parent say who has suddenly lost two children? Tears and sorrow overwhelm him. But vayidom also means silence, and that is the way it is usually translated and the way our commentaries understand this verse. Aaron was silent, which invites the obvious question: why is he silent in the face of such loss? Rashi, writing in the 11th century, along with many of the classical commentators, understand Aaron's silence as acceptance of divine judgment. In response to Moses' explanation of his son's death, Aaron submits to God's will and says nothing. This reading is supported by an interaction a few verses later, when Moses gives Aaron's remaining sons directions for sacrifices, and Aaron contradicts Moses, to which Moses actually agrees that his brother is correct. So with that later conversation in mind, we know that Aaron will speak up if he believes he must. So then why in this moment is he silent? Abarbanel, a 14th century Portuguese commentator, understands this moment a bit differently. Aaron was silent. His heart was turned to stone, and he could not raise his voice in tears, in eulogizing or mourning like a bereaved father. He could not be consoled by Moses because his soul was gone, as was his speech. Abarbanel understands this word vayidom from the word domem, to be inanimate, to be a stone. Aaron was frozen like a stone in this moment. In this reading, Aaron's silence is not acceptance of divine will or passive agreement with his brother's words, but rather his heart is so heavy he cannot cry or speak. His soul feels frozen, unable to process this great loss. His grief overwhelms him, stealing away any words he might say. People who have suffered tragic losses of their own often talk about the emotional shifts that define the days and weeks after. The numbness of grief followed by an attempt to keep busy, keep going to work, distract themselves from grief. They fear if they sit still too long, their sorrow will take hold of them and never let go. Unlike Aaron, they silence their grief before their grief can silence them. When we are not the mourner or the one who has experienced loss, it can be equally challenging to find appropriate words to comfort someone. Does telling someone, "I'm sorry for a loss," truly offer expected comfort? Or are we more afraid of saying nothing? And on the emotional other extreme, in moments of immense joy, Does a simple mazel tov encapsulate all the good wishes we have for someone? I think this is why Judaism has pre-written statements for us to say in moments of deep joy and deep sorrow. When we wish someone mazel tov at their b'nai mitzvah or wedding or birth, we know these words are just a placeholder for all the wonderful praises we have for them. Similarly, when we say to a mourner, may you be comforted, or may your loved one's memory be a blessing, we invoke a tradition that offers us words to say when no words can truly express sorrow and compassion. While the words themselves may or may not offer comfort, the implicit meaning of reaching out to show that we care, of ensuring a friend that we're thinking of them, of showing up for someone at a troubling time in their life is the most important part. The unspoken message, I'm here, even when things are bad, is the actual gift we give one another, even when words aren't enough. So I'd like to extend this reading of the text far beyond the overwhelming personal grief that we see in the Torah, but think of it more on a global scale and global despair and global sorrow. When people say to me, have you seen the news today? I often have to respond, yes, but which awful thing are you referring to? A whirlwind of terrible thoughts might fill my mind, war and conflict, a world leader posting messages of destruction on social media, friends in Israel protesting a war, activists arrested as they try to bring aid to those in need, healthcare problems, famine, food shortages, drought. In the face of all the troubles of the world, perhaps we find ourselves like Aaron, where our hearts feel frozen, incapable of speech in the face of global loss and despair. I think that many of us today feel unsure how to change this chaotic trajectory of world events. Perhaps we feel hopeless or helpless, and like Aaron, when faced with loss we cannot describe, cannot control, cannot avoid, it feels as though our very words have been taken from us. What can we possibly say in response to the immense grief in the world? But here again, Jewish wisdom offers words when none seem adequate. Echa Rabbi, the rabbinic interpretation of the Book of Lamentations, imagines that when Israel is exiled into Babylon, the Shekhinah, the presence of God, goes with them. When Israel mourns for the destruction of the temple and the loss of their home, God weeps alongside them. In one of the greatest moments of collective Jewish sorrow, our tradition imagines God crying alongside us. So too, we might envision an image of God today who cries at the war in Israel, the destruction in Gaza, the death toll in Iran, who worries for the children caught in war zones and orphaned by conflict, a God who weeps as more countries seem to abandon their principles, a God who wonders, how can my creations cause each other so much pain and suffering? Similarly, the words of the prophets offer messages from God to Israel during times of tragedy. The prophet Isaiah writes, Nachamu, Nachamu Ami, comfort, comfort for my people. Even amidst immense sorrow, the divine presence offers comfort to Israel. The psalmist writes that God can transform mourning into dancing, exchange mourning clothes for robes of joy. And the Talmud writes that just as God comforted Abraham, so too God, and by extension we, comfort all who mourn. So in moments when the world seems too heavy to carry, our tradition offers words of comfort and compassion. However, I think the Torah's message in this week's Parsha is that we don't have to fill the silence. Sometimes silence is the only thing expansive enough to hold the immensity of our grief or fear or anxiety for the future. We do not have to fill the silence with words, but rather to let the quiet hold our sorrows and frustrations. Just as one who visits a Shiva house may wait in companionable silence for the mourner to speak, so too we can treat ourselves with compassion when we become overwhelmed at the state of the world. Perhaps we need not rush to speak or post or burst forth and think we need all the answers. Because there is holiness in silence. It allows us freedom not to force our thoughts into coherent sentences, not to look for a solution or push away our despair with busyness. Quiet moments allow space for all of the complexity of human emotion without demanding that we synthesize our troubles. In the face of devastating loss, Aaron reminds us the power of silence. He reminds us that grief takes many forms, and there is no one correct way to mourn. Aaron's silence reminds us that sometimes before we can process and make meaning of any trouble in our life, we must first be allowed to simply experience it. In a world of continuously troubling news, in a time when the future may feel heavy, when the future may feel uncertain, where we must sort through legitimate or exaggerated threats, let us remember that quiet power in stillness. Let us learn from Aaron that we don't always have to have the right words, but we can find comfort and healing in the quiet, surrounded by those who care about us most.